Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Driving the Line, the trucking podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. I'm Jim Seibert, along with my friends and co-hosts Kenny Ray and Mike Bohan, and we are extremely glad you chose to be with us today. Gentlemen, today we are discussing the important topic of springtime traffic hazards, which is fitting for this time of year. As we're all aware, seasons change throughout the year, and more often than not, we witness corresponding changes in traffic movement patterns and the overall safety of those on the road traveling during this time. Some of the changes are directly impacted by seasonal weather conditions, while other changes are the reflection of movement of different types of vehicles and shifting traffic patterns.
You know, Jim, I live out in a rural area in Missouri, and I know just like you and Kenny live in rural areas as well. And I've got a ton of respect for our agricultural community, our farming families out there. They work harder than about anybody I know. And just like in the fall harvest season, the spring planting season brings another really busy time of year for our farmers out there, which means we're going to see more of them out there on the road, right?
True, Mike. The spring and summer months, you're likely to run into these pieces of slow-moving machinery that for most of the year are kept in the barn or worked in the fields close to home. This time of year is where they make the money back for the producers. Harvest and application season may have younger or more experienced drivers behind the helm, and pulling into and out of fields can introduce a lot of mud and other debris to the driving surface. Ag machines by nature are slower moving, and even though many operate faster than other like and kind equipment, they're still well under 40 miles per hour. They require slow moving vehicle symbols and a reflective orange triangle on the rear of that vehicle. They're often poorly lit. The signals may or may not be functioning correctly. They might be obstructed by add-on pieces of equipment, such as tanks or booms. Given that slow-moving nature of the equipment, the need for patience is a must. Speed and space management really become a factor when the drivers are considering passing this equipment. If the maximum road speed of an implement is, say, 30 miles per hour, and your rig has had to slow down behind that piece of equipment to wait for a passing window, the passing distance is going to be much longer. An example that comes to my mind is a farm truck that's hauling 3 or 4 anhydrous tanks. And we've seen that going down the road and that serpentine effect, and it's an elongated vehicle at that point. The passing distance increases a lot just due to the speed that you had to slow down to and the speed that an area that you're going to have to pick up to get around them. Mike, what are some other considerations for the listeners of today?
Well, I tell you, another springtime hazard that's really important for us to bring up is driver fatigue. Now, driver fatigue is not necessarily just a springtime issue, but one big contributing factor for additional fatigue in the springtime, which we may not always think about in the context of transportation safety, is daylight savings time. Now, I know we all know about it, and I don't know too many people who like it that much. I know here in the Bohan household, people get a little cranky around daylight savings time. And by people, I mean me. I get a little cranky, daylight savings time, but it's hanging around. So we need to address that. Okay, so when we're talking about daylight savings time in the spring, the hours of the day are shifted so there's more sunlight at the end of the day, right? So that gives us a little more work in the daylight at the end of the day, but it also makes us go to bed a little later. It makes us fall asleep a little later, which ultimately means we're losing some sleep. And an hour doesn't seem like it's that big of a shift, but it can disrupt our circadian rhythm. And our bodies are guided by a circadian rhythm which is just a 24-hour cycle that's really largely dependent on light and dark schedules. You know, we want to sleep when it's dark. We want to be awake when it's light. So a disruption in our circadian rhythm can result in sleep loss, and it can result in a thing called sleep debt, which is especially dangerous for our truck drivers out there because it can become more of a chronic condition. And when I say sleep debt, it just simply means we're not getting enough sleep that our body needs over an extended period of time, and we're just constantly tired, we're fatigued, and it just negatively impacts a driver's health and their safety. They feel tired all day long. They can't maintain their focus or process information as well. And it can really even compromise their immune system. So I wanted to provide just a few tips on how drivers can get some quality sleep, because I know that is a challenge for our industry. So a couple of things to consider: don't consume any caffeinated beverages or alcohol right before bed. Obviously, we don't want to have alcohol in the trucks, but if you're drinking coffee or some kind of caffeinated beverage right before you go to bed, it's going to affect your quality of sleep. So steer clear of that stuff in the afternoons. Maybe start drinking water, and maybe not much to drink at all right before you go to bed. It'll help you get some more rest that night. If you can, block out all the light out of your cab and keep it cool. That'll help you get some better sleep. And this next one is a tough one for me, and I find myself doing this all the time, and I'm sure probably everybody listening in, probably everybody here struggles with this as well, but stay off your screens when you're in bed. That blue light can really affect that circadian rhythm. And for me, I can get on my phone right before I go to bed and think I'm heading to bed. I'm going to get some sleep. And I get on that phone, and an hour later, I realize I have just wasted a ton of time. And now I've just lost an hour of sleep because I couldn't get off my dumb phone. So stay off those screens at bedtime too. The next one is try to get that big block of sleep, like 7 hours. And I know truck drivers, we don't have the same bedtime every day, and our alarm clocks aren't going off the same time every morning either. But it is written into the hours of service regulations that we've got big chunks of time that we can get rest. So try to get a big chunk of sleep every day, not just those 30, 40, 45-minute naps or an hour nap. Try to get a big chunk of sleep every day. The last thing, get some fresh air throughout the day. If you're stopped on a break or something like that, get out of your truck, walk around, get some fresh air, maybe even do some light exercise. It's going to help you out. And I pulled these off of some different resources, but I did have something here from the Department of Health and Human Services. They've got a brochure out. It's called Quick Sleep Tips for Truck Drivers. And it's got some really good information on it. Some of the things I covered there, it's got some additional information. So if you're interested in that, go out and take a look at that. It's online. Some other resources there for quality sleep tips for truck drivers at the cdc.gov/sleep is a resource, sleepfoundation.org, and then drowsydriving.org, all good resources you can take a look at, and it's going to help hopefully get some better sleep, get some more rest for you when you're out there on the road. And just remember, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you are a commercial motor vehicle driver, if you are tired, regardless of how many hours you have left to drive, or how many hours you have left to be on duty, don't take any chances. Driving fatigued is really one of the most dangerous things that you can do. As I said before, it slows your reaction time. It impairs your judgment. It can affect a lot of different things. It's the cause of a ton of motor vehicle crashes, as well as a compliance issue for us as commercial drivers. So just remember that. And then on a side note, I did want to bring this up as well. When we're talking about this shift in the hours, daylight savings time in the month of March, if you are using ELDs, it's probably going to account for that change in time. But just remember, you can't gain an hour of drive time or an on-duty time just because the time changed, okay? And again, ELDs are probably going to capture that for you. But if you're using paper logs, you want to make sure you don't go over your 11-hour driving limit. You don't go over your 14-hour on duty without getting the proper rest. That's very important as far as a compliance issue for our drivers out there. So Jim mentioned some hazards we may see on the road regarding farm equipment. I've talked about some of the hazards our drivers may face regarding fatigue in the springtime, especially with the change in time. Kenny, what are some other springtime hazards we may see out there for our drivers?
I'm going to share some of those, Mike, but your admonition to drivers about making sure they stop when they're fatigued, no matter what else is going on. That reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in a long, long time. Both of y'all know, most of our audience doesn't know, I'm a retired Texas State Trooper, and I stopped a truck driver. This has been 30-something years ago. I stopped a truck driver, and he was going the wrong way on a 4-lane divided highway. It wasn't an interstate, but it was U.S. highway. And he was, imagine that, he's eastbound in the westbound lanes in a fully loaded 18-wheeler. And I got him stopped. I didn't have any trouble with him. He was not intoxicated. He was fatigued beyond imagination, to the point that when he was sitting in my car and we were talking, he fell asleep in the middle of our conversation. And I physically had to wake him up. And I said, how long have you been awake? He said, I don't know. He said, I don't even know what the day is. And this was a time when we didn't have the driver shortage that we had now. We actually had a driver abundance then. And he told me, he said, I have to have this job to feed my family. And he said, if I don't keep running, they've got a file cabinet full of applications and they'll just fill this seat. But the point is that man was dangerous. And it goes to the fact that you're talking about fatigue, which is an issue with the change of the seasons. I want to visit with our audience a little bit about the weather conditions that change. You know, we kind of define our 4 seasons across our country by the type of weather that we're having. Now, in Texas, we have 10 months of summer and 2 months of pleasant. But, you know, there's other parts of the country that have legitimate changes of season. And one thing that happens in the spring is the dynamics primarily of thunderstorms. Mike, you're in the state of Missouri, and one of y'all's favorite sons, Mark Twain, with a certain degree of exaggeration, once said, in the spring, now think about this. Mark Twain said, in the spring, I've counted 136 kinds of weather inside of 24 hours. Now, we know that's an exaggeration, but the point that Mr. Twain was making was spring weather is very unpredictable. It changes. I mean, y'all think about this. Here we are right now in early March, and we've already had some 90-degree days in the South. I'm in Texas. We've already hit 90 degrees down here. And yet the snow chain laws are still in effect through May in the mountain states of the West. And some of our northern neighbors still got snow on the ground. So, you know, it's a dynamic, constantly changing and changing quickly weather situation in the spring. Now, that weather affects what we see on the highway. And I want to share just some common spring driving conditions that we'll see. There's road damage coming out of the winter weather, whether it's a result of the freeze and thaw, potholes. As the snow and ice starts melting, we actually see physical damage to the pavement itself, particularly in the northern states. You mentioned about the days getting longer. That puts sun glare on us at different times in those longer days. The warmer weather starts bringing people and animals out that haven't been out during the winter. We're going to see more bicycles. We're going to see more motorcycles. We're going to see more pedestrians, people out jogging, kids playing on playgrounds. And all of these things are things that professional truck drivers have got to be aware of, that as it warms up, it's like our nation, both from a nature standpoint and from a human standpoint, is coming back alive. And people are going to be outside enjoying more things. And invariably, that either puts them on the highway or near the highway. And drivers have to be aware of those things. I know a lot of truck drivers that struggle with seasonal allergies. And in the springtime, you know, we're already having it in Texas with cedar. And it can just wipe a truck driver out to the point that he's sneezing and he's got a runny nose and his eyes are watering. And invariably they take some sort of antihistamine, which makes them drowsy. And there's this whole dynamic that takes place with the change of weather. But, you know, the purpose of our podcast is truck safety and transportation safety. And we always focus on our drivers. We want our drivers to be safe. And I want to share 3 things real quick with our truck drivers that are directly tied to the change of weather in the spring with these thunderstorms that occur. And these are specific things I want drivers to think about to keep themselves personally safe and to keep their family safe. One of the first functions of a thunderstorm is lightning. We have about 20 people a year in the U.S. that are killed by lightning strikes. I can't think of a much more horrible way to die than to get hit by a bolt of lightning. And many, many other people get injured that are within the proximity of a lightning strike. And I started thinking about with truck drivers, when would they be susceptible to that? Well, it's anytime they're out of their truck and there's a thunderstorm going on. So if they're tarping a load on a flatbed, if they're loading or unloading and they're responsible for being around the trailer and being outside, if they're standing at a fuel island, fueling the tractor, if they're walking across a parking lot at the yard or at the truck stop going in to eat supper or to eat lunch, and there's a thunderstorm going on, there's the chance there of getting hit by lightning. The second thing, and this is the one that comes to mind most for us in the South, is tornadoes. Tornadoes are tied to thunderstorms and tied to severe spring weather. We mentioned about 20 people a year die in our country from lightning strikes. About 80 people a year die in our country as a result of tornadoes, and well over 1,000, close to 1,500 people are injured every year by tornadoes. We've all seen videos on YouTube of four-wheelers, 18-wheelers just getting tossed around. Even an 80,000-pound truck is no match for a major tornado. So being in that vehicle is not necessarily a safe place to be. Tornadoes put down a lot of trees and limbs, all kind of debris flying around, ending up on the highway. And I was reading a couple of things interesting about tornadoes. Only about a third of them occur at night, but almost 50% of the deaths related to tornadoes occur at night. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you can't see them at night. They're coming, but you don't know they're coming. And so it's so important to stay tuned into the weather, listening to the weather radio, or if you're at a truck stop, check it out on, the Weather Channel on TV and see what's going on. It's interesting where the three of us that are on this podcast are physically located, because I looked at the states that are big tornado states. We're number one down here in Texas. We have more than anybody else. I don't think that's something we like to brag about. It's just a fact of life. State of Kansas is number 2. Jim, Oklahoma's number 3 on the list for tornadoes, followed by Alabama, Mississippi, Illinois, Iowa, Mike, number 8, Missouri, and then Florida and Nebraska. And you think about those states, picture the geography in your mind. A lot of trucking goes on in those states, particularly during the spring, and that's when it represents a danger for these drivers. And the last thing, thunderstorms bring a tremendous amount of rain, heavy rain, which results in flooding. I mentioned about 20 people a year die as a result of lightning strikes. About 80 people a year die as a result of tornadoes. But flooding and drowning deaths in flooding account for over 150 deaths. So twice basically what tornadoes do, and thousands of injuries as a result of flooding, and particularly on roadways. People driving through a flooded roadway, their car stalls, and next thing you know, it's swept downstream and they die. Most of the states have adopted the little logo or the mantra, turn around, don't drown. That's easy to do if you're on a motorcycle or a car. It's not always easy to do if you're in an 18-wheeler on a 2-lane road. Probably there, your best bet is to stop. Don't try to cross a flooded highway. You're not going to have a lot of traffic out there anyway, but we certainly don't want you driving into a flooded highway. We end up here in Texas, some of our largest cities, Houston and Dallas. If we get heavy rain there, the underpasses on the interstates tend to flood. And next time y'all are driving around, anybody listening to this podcast, you go under, I'm talking about an underpass that goes, you'll be on a major interstate, but it crosses under a road. And look and see if they've got one of those flood gauges, those poles that are graduated with the feet. You'll be amazed how deep that water can be. I mean, it's measured 10, 12, 14 feet deep. And so you imagine that would even totally cover an 18-wheeler. So turn around, don't drown. We don't want anybody getting hurt. And the last thing, and Jim, I'm going to punt it back to you, is so what? What do we do about how do we stay safe in these dynamic weather conditions, these changing spring weather conditions? Well, it goes back to basically life 101. It's proper preparation. We need to check the weather. We need to know what it's like wherever we're headed on our current trip. We need to stay current if it's getting bad around us, and have a plan. And the plan can be as simple as, if you're sitting at the truck stop fixing to go in and eat supper and there's lightning hitting all around, just know thunderstorms tend to move pretty quick. Wait 10 or 15 minutes before you go in. Let the lightning quit hit. If you're in a tornado area, look for a safe place to get. That primarily is a small windowless interior room. In most buildings, that's a restroom. The restroom's safer than sitting in the restaurant where you're completely surrounded by glass windows. And then finally, on the flooded highways, again, just make up your mind. My plan is I don't drive through water that's over the roadway that I can't see the center stripe on the highway. I'm either going to stop, or if there's a place where I can, I'm going to turn around and don't drown. So, Jim, you did a great job covering the fact that we're going to have farm equipment, ag equipment moving on our highways. Mike, super job talking about the circadian rhythms and the length of the daylight and how that leads to driver fatigue. And then, ultimately it's all tied to these weather changes that we have. So spring's a wonderful time of the year. We all enjoy it, but we just need to be properly prepared, check the weather, and always have a plan. And Jim, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks for those great observations and inputs, gentlemen. Let's just recognize that the springtime season leading into summer, there's going to be multiple pieces of non-uniformity on the roadways. It pulls us out of sync, can sometimes frustrate us, mostly because we're either running behind or we just don't want to come off of our cruise control. So we need to plan ahead, like Kenny has said here. Possibly look at alternate routes if your planning allows for it. If you know you're going to be driving through a rural area, likely to encounter it, and you're on a time-sensitive delivery or return, what alternate routes can get you on major roadways? So before we wrap up, Mike, Kenny, you guys have any closing thoughts for the listeners?
I'll just throw out there, as we've been talking today about hazards, specifically the springtime hazards. Just remember for our drivers out there, to take care of yourselves and to take care of your equipment. Those are two things that are within your control. It can help you both yourself. We're talking about fatigue and getting rest, things like that. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. You're eating right, taking care of your body. Make sure you're looking your truck over. Make sure that that it's in a safe operating condition. And then when we talk about these external hazards, Kenny talked about the weather, the tornadoes, the thunderstorms, things like that, or maybe the slow moving equipment that Jim's been talking about. Just be alert, be aware, and be prepared. And Kenny said that, be prepared. That's part of our job in this industry, is just to be prepared. Always expect something out of the ordinary. As you're going through the springtime, this time of year, with all of these changes, just expect that something could happen. The weather could come up and you might have to adjust your route. Or I know, Kenny, you were talking about down south when heavy rains flood the cities and stuff. I remember a few years ago in St. Louis, we got some torrential rainfall in Missouri, and they shut down Interstate 55 South St. Louis. I mean, the interstate was covered. It wasn't an overpass. It was just the interstate. They just completely shut down. You couldn't get through. So just know that there's going to be times when there's not anything you can do, but just stop. And I really appreciate you saying that, stop, turn around, don't drown. That may be the thing, is like, you're not going to go through there, at least not right now. So make sure that you are not taking any chances. Just like with the hours of service that I mentioned, don't take chances, drive tired. Well, don't take chances and drive through any water or think you can beat a storm or anything like that. Protect yourself. That's what we want. We want everybody coming home safe at night. So remember that. Just be prepared, protect yourself, take care of yourself, take care of your truck. And I think that'll go a long way to helping you out there on the road.
Amen. And I'll just close with this, Jim. I'm the son of a truck driver. My dad's already deceased now, but the only job my daddy ever had was driving a truck. And he used to tell me that he loved seeing our country. He never, ever grew tired of looking out the windshield at the variety of terrain in the United States. And that's one thing that draws drivers into this profession, is they like to travel. They like to go. But just know this time of the year, that moving is you're constantly changing into different weather patterns. And so you've always got to be prepared for that. I mean, here we are right now in early March. And again, we've had 90-degree days in Texas, which if you're down tarping a load on the Gulf Coast with our humidity, that could represent a heat danger to you, overheating. And yet some of our northern states have still got ice and snow on roadways, and the snow chain laws are still in effect in the Mountain West. So as these drivers move around our country, just realize the dynamics of this changing. They're adding to that as they move into these different weather patterns and these different environmental situations. And like Mike said, it's about being properly prepared, thinking ahead, and always having a plan. Always having a plan.
And Kenny, I just posed one question to you, because you mentioned this when you were talking about the tornadoes, and I hate high wind, and I hate the thought of a tornado. It's just one of the things that I just always bothered me. Let's say we've got a driver out there on the road. He's not at a truck stop, or she's not at a truck stop, or someplace where they can get inside or get into that bathroom, that interior room like you were talking about. They may be on the side of the road and there's a tornado to come through. Is there any tips, anything you can tell them if they get caught literally out on the road in a storm like that?
You know, Mike, it goes back. The advice has always been try to get as low as you can, even to the point that, you know, there's been recommendations by folks to get into a ditch, get down into a big drainage culvert. If there's one going under the highway, get under a bridge if you could. But, you know, that's so situationally specific that drivers just need to kind of be thinking through that all the time. I'm going to tell you, there's not a lot on this earth I'm terrified, but I'm terrified of snakes. And the thought of getting down into a ditch and knowing that there might be a water moccasin down in there, I just soon face the tornado.
Taking on the tornado, huh?
Yeah. So the point's going to be, you know, you just got to play that by ear. But I think the important thing is, and it's what you and I were talking about, the proper preparation and knowing about the weather, is drivers knowing ahead of time and saying, you know, Central Missouri right now, they're under a tornado warning, and I'm 2 hours from there. I'm fixing to take a break. I'm not going to drive into that.
Yeah, just stop. Don't head that way. Let it go through.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
That's what you said that about those weather patterns and stuff. They're going to move through. It's not going to stay there forever. Just be safe. Take a break. Let it go through, then continue on your way. But
absolutely.
Great advice, Kenny. Thank you for that.
Kenny, I'm anticipating a mass exodus, and I'm interested in seeing the statistics of the truck drivers that move out of Texas into states that do not have water moccasins, based off what you just said.
Yeah.
Thank you both for the great input. To our listeners, if you need additional information, please reach out to your trusted risk consultant. In the next episode of Driving the Line, we're going to discuss pre-trips, post-trips, DVIRs, and untangling the confusion therein. Until then, for my co-hosts, Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray, I'm Jim Seibert. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us on Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.